Hi, I'm Sam. I'm an author and filmmaker who became fixated on the idea of making a video game a few years back. Since I have a full-time day job and keep myself extremely busy with all manner of personal creative projects, and since I have no experience or education in game design or development, I kept pushing that fixation away, just sort of stuffing down that desire to make a video game because it seemed so unattainable. But no matter how much I tried to push that notion away, I would always find myself circling back around to it sooner or later. So I said, all right, fine, I'll stop ignoring this clear passion project, and I'll get to work on building the necessary knowledge base and skill set to create the type of video game that I've long wanted to experience as a player. An open-world murder mystery that has the player take on the role of an FBI agent tasked with catching a serial killer and drops him into a fully realized town where every single location can be explored and every single resident can be questioned with a complex branching dialogue system and a world and story that reacts to the player's choices. There are a lot of great detective games out there, but even the best, like Disco Elysium, haven't really given me that sensation of truly unraveling a mystery and solving a complicated crime through open-ended investigative work. That's the goal of Hardcore Homicide, a game that places the emphasis on telling a compelling narrative with complex characters, but also on empowering player choice. A game that forces you to pay attention, take notes by hand, make genuine deductions and inductions, and decide how to use your time wisely with regard to who you question and where you investigate. The serial killer remains active in the town throughout your investigation, and the longer you take to unravel the crime, the more bodies will pile up, placing weight on every choice that you make. A witness that you didn't get around to questioning yet could become the next victim. Or you might arrest your prime suspect only for another corpse to turn up the next morning. I've previously released 2 novels and have a third on the way, plus a horror poetry book that I co-authored with my partner that is finished and releasing imminently. I'm not someone who starts projects and then abandons them. I have no trouble seeing my passion projects through to completion. But there's one novel that I began writing all the way back before my first book was released that I never finished. I spent an extremely long time working on this book, and I would pick it back up over the years, and I got over 250 pages into that story, but I never finished it. Why? Because I came to the realization that I was writing it in the wrong medium. You see, I had become obsessed with the idea of trying to write what I kept calling an open-world novel. I was quite literally trying to bring an open-world video game design ethos into the literary format of a linear book. So how did this work? Well, it didn't really. That's why the novel never came together. What it meant in practice is that I did the legwork of designing an entire town, the rural New England town of Cornucopia, creating a giant map by hand on paper, and populating it with all of the people and places that filled out this open-world novel, without any idea as to whether or not the protagonist of the book would go to the vast majority of these locations or question the vast majority of these characters. But it was important to me that these people and places be fleshed out because the character could go there. I mapped out the mystery, of course, but I didn't set any particular way to solve the crime in stone. Then I went about approaching the narrative in a more stream-of-consciousness way to have the character tackle the crime in what felt like a more authentic, less calculated manner. I also turned the world and plot into a homebrew D&D scenario and had different people attempt to solve the crime from square one. Then I used the choices that those players made, the places they went, and the people they questioned, to further make the narrative feel more freeform and realistic than a pre-planned investigation could be. Attempting to write an open-world novel also meant quite literally putting side quests into the book in the form of additional side mysteries and other objectives that the protagonist had to attempt to solve or complete alongside the main mystery. What all of this gamification meant in the context of a book was a novel that did have an effectively sprawling, freeform feel, but that was only about 10% of the way through the story, even as it surpassed the total page count of my second published novel. In retrospect, the solution was clear from the outset and completely undeniable. This was a story that was always meant to be told as a video game. I mean, it's obvious. I was trying to write a novel as if it was a video game instead of just making a video game. But that's because the idea of actually making a video game seemed impossible to me for the longest time. But not anymore. I've been working on this project in relative secrecy for a long time, and now I know it's possible. I'm aware that this is going to be an extremely long process, but Hardcore Homicide is officially in production, and I've been full steam ahead on it for quite some time now. I took my time planning everything out, figuring out the various game mechanics and whatnot, and mapping out the broad strokes of the overall story and the side mysteries in more detail with several ways for the player to handle each obstacle and arrive at each conclusion, plus multiple completely different endings despite each mystery being fully handcrafted without any randomization or procedural generation going on. The next major step of actually building the game itself was for me to figure out how video games are even really written in the first place, which was more challenging than I expected. I spent countless hours searching for examples of video game scripts just written out and finished, only to learn that they aren't usually written as a single gigantic document like I had imagined. I set about trying to find my ideal software for writing a branching narrative with the flexibility to accommodate huge amounts of player freedom. I tried out several programs that all had pros and cons, but never fully sold me, like Twine, ChoiceScript, Inkle, and a few others, before finally landing on Artisy Draft, which was the program used for the aforementioned Disco Elysium. That's how it got on my radar. Artisy instantly clicked with me, and it became my game writing software moving forward. I genuinely love working in this program and seeing the story and dialogue options endlessly branch outward with each tiny player choice. I then settled on Unity as the game engine and set about running a bunch of tests and fiddling around by making a few mini test projects to get to grips with the program. And I tell you, the learning curve on this thing is steep as all hell. The first 2 times I made a major effort to learn Unity, I got overwhelmed and just bounced off the program altogether. But when I came back for a 3rd attempt and committed to sticking with it, the program finally started to make more and more sense the further I got. And I've now made pretty substantial progress. There's a lot about the program that's quite unintuitive, but it is graspable if you keep smashing yourself against the side of it for long enough. You can see some of the game world that I built on screen here. Obviously, this is far away from release with lots of placeholders and things to be polished up, but I'm really happy with how it's all coming together at this point. Using Unity also means coding in C#, which is not something that I enjoy. It's the part of game dev that always takes me the longest and makes me most feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm getting through it and making progress all the same. Next, I eventually came to the realization that I couldn't do all of the modeling that I wanted to do in Unity alone using the built-in tools and the Pro Builder add-on. I was loath to learn another complex program, but after making substantial progress in Unity, I finally admitted, okay, it's time to learn Blender. And you know what? I love Blender. Something about this program just instantly clicked with me. I never would have thought that I would ever get into 3D modeling, but it turns out that it's just endlessly fun to me, and I find myself wanting to spend every free moment that I have in Blender building locations and props and pieces of evidence, etc. The materials and textures aren't as fun to work with for me, but I'll get around to learning those parts of the program soon enough. And so this is definitely a long-term project, but it feels like progress is moving pretty fast. For now, it's me and my partner Gray working on the game. We might expand the team at some point, perhaps adding a coding expert, for example, or we might just stay a game dev duo. And speaking of Gray, check out these awesome portraits that Gray has been making for the game. These are the NPC portraits that will come up whenever the player enters dialogue with someone. Gray's also handling things like the game's UI, the interior design of locations, and all the major art pieces, like the game's eventual poster, 2D artwork displayed at crime scenes, things like that. If you read my first book, Gray was the one who illustrated this excellent cover, as well as the cover of our co-authored poetry book. We're also working on designing the layout of the locations together from the huge list of locations that I made back when the project was a novel called Cornucopia, instead of a video game called Hardcore Homicide, Cornucopia. I start by sketching the floor plans on graph paper by hand, then Gray makes a digital version that's cleaned up, refined, and has some more detail. Then I bring that finalized blueprint into Blender and build the location in 3D, plus the larger fixtures, furniture pieces, and appliance. Then it'll go back to Gray to do the more detailed interior design work, and add all the little items and clutter and whatnot that makes the place feel lived in. What you're seeing now are a couple of locations in progress, which the player will be able to enter directly from the open world and explore in any order that their non-linear investigation leads them. That's a quick look at the state of Hardcore Homicide as of May 3rd, 2025. We'll be chipping away at getting the rest of our long list of locations fully realized and adding to the collection of portraits, props, etc. With placeholders and missing smaller assets, the basic game world in Unity is just about finished, and the basics of player movement are finished. So I'll be getting started on adding NPCs and connecting up the Artisy dialogue system pretty soon. I'll make another devlog once the next big chunk of progress has been made. And until then, Gray and I will be diligently chipping away at the game behind the scenes. So stay tuned for further updates, and if you want to support this endeavor and all the other YouTube stuff here, you can visit the Patreon link on screen or in the description and help out financially. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later on.